Welcome, my friends, to the sweet spot where IT leaders share the insight with other leaders and others that want to lead. My name is Carlos Vargas, and as in every week, I have my two co-hosts, Howard Holton and Paul Lewis. Hello, guys.
Hey there.
The only one that is home is Howard.
But how do you know that's Howard's home? That might be a virtual background of his home.
That's true. That's true. No, I'm at home today. Amazingly enough, like I went from 200 plus days last year to like 40 days, 50 days in the first 5 months.
Right.
Now to effectively zero in the last few. It's going to pick up again over summer, right? I'm now firmly tied to the convention schedule. So I'll be going to pretty much every major and probably 40 minor events this year.
Is Snowflake one of those conventions next week?
Is Snowflake next week?
Yes.
I think I added it to my list. I'm not sure that I booked my travel though.
Starts on the 14th, Monday.
Well, I guess I should get on top of that then.
Imagine the types of meals we could have.
Yeah, that sounds delightful.
I'm gonna enjoy my feijoada in Brazil, so I can.
Nice. How is it?
You know, it's really interesting. We are probably like 10 minutes from farmland. So I've been flying drones, filming farmland, like all the stuff. The family get together and they do a huge barbecue style with everything that you can imagine. So it's been really interesting. Coffee is good, really good.
See, now
You got to go a little further north if you want the coffee to get better. I have a friend who spent 4 years living with farmers in Colombia.
Yeah.
And it's that was good times for me because he'd be like, "Hey, I found this farmer who's got his own coffee. You want some?" And then I'd just randomly receive a bag, a 1 to 5 pound bag of coffee in the mail.
Would you have to self roast? Like this is raw beans?
No. It came roasted.
Okay.
They would of course they would roast it because otherwise you can't trust that I was not going to destroy it.
Right.
But yeah, that was awesome. I probably got 40 pounds of coffee and
That's a lot of coffee.
It was a lot of coffee. I gave away a lot of coffee.
I imagine a big burro bag slapped down.
Yeah, we were trying to put something together to import because there's a ton of like in Colombia, you've got a bunch of very, very, very large farms that produce most of the coffee, and then you have a ton of tiny family farms whose coffee never, ever, ever leaves, the country. Right. And we were trying to put together, like, is there some way to almost democratize the import process to get the coffee, out in the rest of the world?
Right. And it was not possible?
No, the problem actually ended up being the guy in Colombia. He wasn't really dedicated enough to make it work. And if you don't have that heart, none of it's going to work.
Got it.
So they were listening to different things. Anything interesting this week? Any ideas? Anything that could be used in the real world? Because in here, all that I'm hearing is chit chat, and I don't know what's true or what is false. A little bit of gossip here, a little bit of something there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going through a refi right now, right? So I'm really kind of trying to pay attention to, and we were shopping for a house, but the market is so strained, and between the market and interest rates, right? We were like, I'm not sure this is the right time to buy, right? And so we were listening to kind of every smart and not so smart, reasonably authoritative source you could find, trying to figure out, are interest rates going to continue to go up? Are interest rates going to drop? If they're going to drop, when are they going to drop? Is that going to correspond to a dip in the market? Right? Is that at all reasonable to develop a strategy around, and trying to figure out, is it gossip or is it reality? And we were really struggling with it so much so that we just decided to refi and sit for 6 months and see what happens. I realized, not necessarily tech related, but I think everyone's really concerned about what's going on with interest rates.
Yeah,
My prediction-
inflation is an issue.
Well, and we use interest rates as a tool to curb inflation.
Right.
My bet is end of summer we're going to see a sharp drop in interest rates.
Interesting.
Right, because there's a lot of spending, consumer spending that goes on during summer. So if you lower interest rates now, combine that with the increase that's going to come in spending from it, that already is going to be on that would then be on top of summer spending. You're going to do the opposite, right? You're going to allow inflation to spiral again. But if you wait until the kids go back to school, which is traditionally when most of our major spending stalls, right? Everybody's got their tax return, kids are back in school, you're not interested in changing houses, you're not likely to, do your big car spending, you're not doing your big family vacations. As soon as that stall happens, that stumble hits, right? Figure mid-September, I think we're going to see a solid drop in interest rates to try to, because then you are going to have this big stumble, can't stop economic growth, and I think we're then going to see interest rates respond positively.
In the dip before Black Friday.
Yeah, because Black Friday doesn't really, Black Friday makes no real difference on inflation.
But it's a pretty big spend period, is it not, between Black Friday and Christmas?
It is, and you need to maintain that spend, right? So you need cash to be a little cheaper to get, because if that causes another stumble and you get shrinkage in the economy, you've kind of undone exactly what you're out to, and then you might get into reactionary hyperinflation, which would be the worst thing in the world.
Oh, somebody just came in. Anybody we know, Carlos?
No, that was my oldest. So thinking about that, if we think in a corporation, they're normally paying attention to what's happening. Could be the inflation, could be new technology, could be a lot of chit chat from different places. And sometimes that could be something that sounds like gossip. Sometimes it may transfer and become actual valid information when it matures. How does a CIO pay attention and know the difference between both?
So it depends how important each one of your sources are. So I've had the privilege of having 3 in-person physical CIO roundtables recently. And the topics have all been the same. So there was a sort of global talent topic. You might refer to it great resignation, but it was mostly about how do I retain my talent. Then there was a cloud conversation, and most of that was, what do I do with my most expensive and most complex applications? Then there was a data component of the conversation to say, how do I sort of shift my IT spending into creating insights? And then there was a little bit of conversation on security, right? To say, while I'm pretty good on the outside, I'm less good on the inside. How do I protect the assets, not just from my insider organization, but my assets that I always felt were so deep in the network that I didn't have to worry about it, and now I have to worry about it. Right? And I would say most CIOs I talk to in those roundtables, they believe that their best information assets are other CIOs. Sure, they'll dip in the Gartners and Forresters and GigaOms and all those kind of things, and they'll get sort of summaries of what maybe hundreds or thousands of people think, but it's the real world stories that I think moves a gossip to a trend. At least that's what I believe I heard when I talked to them.
It's interesting, the kind of peer review, because that's what everybody wants. And everybody wants the same peer review, right? The people that I care about, I want to hear a story that makes it real. Right? Facts and figures are great, but the reality is we don't exist in facts and figures. We exist in the day-to-day stories that move our life forward, right? Right before this, I had a call where that was exactly the point, right? What we really want you to do is bring those stories that you have and tell them to our team, right? So they get some understanding of what your day-to-day life looks like. Then they can figure out how to talk. If you just say, hey, here's 5 bullets that you need to focus on, it doesn't really work, right?
Especially localized. So the last one I was in was Thursday night in Calgary. And the global talent part of our conversation, which would not shock you, is at least 50% of that 4-hour conversation, like a very long conversation. And of those 2 hours, many of the stories were about a disjointed localization of staff. So most of those organizations were used to having staff live and work in Calgary, go to the office constantly, meet, work, do what they need to do. But as over the last couple of years, people have moved home, they've moved away, they move out of the city, they have little to no desire to go into the office. And of some of those sort of 5 to 10 year tenured people, they've moved on to bigger jobs with more salary. So having to replace those people, they've had to specifically state in the job description and through the interviewing process that we have zero expectation that you show up to this Calgary office. In fact, I'm not even necessarily going to look in Calgary for those resources. I'm perfectly fine looking in other cities, in other provinces, in other countries, even though they wouldn't necessarily desire it to be true. So I'm finding even the localization of the story becomes important.
Almost 2 years ago, we had this conversation, right? And if you remember, our take on it was, this is fantastic because now I no longer have a 20 to 25 mile radius around my office to search for, but rather I have a 2 to 4 time zone radius to search, right? And wow, this is amazing. Right? Like our take on this was super early, super easy, super, embracing the remote work kind of future. We saw the writing on the wall, right? You can't give someone a benefit and then take it away when they have nothing to do with the giving or the taking, right? You want to take it away because I failed some responsibility bar. Cool. You take it away to be arbitrary? No, I'm sorry. You cannot do that. I've now become used to it. This now fits my life. And really early on in this whole pandemic, we said, this is the way it's going to change. I'm continually amazed how hard it is for people to get over it, right? How hard it is for people to kind of understand that no, good leadership means you don't actually have to watch your people.
I think that's the key. You just hit something very important. We used to think that leadership was, I am walking in front of you. And if you probably remember Office Space.
Yep.
They had it on, I think that was Prime about 2 weeks ago. And I haven't watched it in a while. So I watched the whole thing. And to see the guy with the cup of coffee, like literally just walking.
How's it going?
Report. I actually one time worked for a company that had a TPS report. I don't remember what the heck it was, but they had the TPS report and 8 calls, understanding that now your leadership need to completely switch. So you can trust your people, be able to help them with, like you said, what can I take that is holding you from accomplishing the goal for your role? And come to me when there's a stumbling block and when I remove it so you can continue doing it. I think that's the biggest challenge. How do you, or both of you, look at that for the people that you work with?
It's actually the easiest thing in the world. So I would say it's 2 things. The first is management does not equal leadership, does not equal management. They are very distinctly separate skills, right? The second is trust. Leadership requires trust. Your people have to trust you, but far more importantly, you must trust them.
Yep.
Right? The second you trust your people, my director of infrastructure is going to do the job. I'm going to trust them to do the job. And every decision I make is going to come from a place of trust. The second I make that decision, I don't actually need to watch them. Right? I know they're going to bubble up those things that are important for me to know. They're going to answer any question that I have as well as they can. And I trust that if they can't answer the question, they'll answer honestly and then find the answer for me if it's important that I know.
Yep.
Right?
I agree. I use different words. I use transparency and empowerment, right? So I have an expectation of 100% transparency from my leadership to me, from me to my leadership, and that I empower you to do your job because you're probably better at your job than I am, right? So you do things that you have to do, and then when you require either a decision or you need me to provide some value in some way for your job, then I'm happy to do so. But I'm not about to micromanage each one of your activities because I presume that you know what you're doing.
Right.
Another,
150%, right? But I think, like, I don't want to move past that for a minute.
okay.
Because I think it's really, really, really important to understand, if you can't trust your people, look to yourself first, right? Is there something about me that's preventing me from trusting? Right? If you have 12 people that work for you and 10 of them you don't trust, that's a you problem. You have 12 people that work for you and there are 2 you don't trust, that might be a them problem, and you probably should look at it.
Right.
Right? And until you get over that, you're not going to get anywhere. Responsibility must come with empowerment, right? You can't have one without the other, right? If you're responsible for it, then you must also have the authority to execute it.
Yep.
Right? You can't
Presuming you as the CIO have also been empowered by your CEO or your COO or your CFO.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Because I would say your lack of empowerment and your lack of authority should not translate to your people equally. Like there may very well be areas that you simply don't have the authority.
Right. You can't purchase anything greater than $1 million.
Correct. You can't purchase anything greater than $1.
Right.
Whatever it happens to be. Like, okay, cool. That creates one fence post. That creates one guardrail. That doesn't mean you then put an infinite number of guardrails on your people. Right. And part of it really is figuring out, what's a real guardrail, what's not a real guardrail, making sure your people understand and have an expectation. Hey, here's your guardrails. I trust you implicitly within those guardrails. If you need to go outside of them, hey, just bubble it up.
Right.
What's important that you know? And never get mad at your people for not telling you something that you didn't make sure they knew was important that you know. Hey, I didn't think that was important, boss. Cool. Just for future reference. That's the kind of stuff I want to know, but moving forward, that's great. Not worried about it now. Let's get going.
So is there any other way other than, person-to-person networking or those roundtables where you get these stories, right? These sort of hard-earned facts versus, something that an analyst would provide you?
I mean,
is this the real way?
No, I mean, sure. There's 1,000 ways, right? I can read the story that someone wrote. I can read an interview. I can listen to an interview. I can listen to a webinar, right? But all of them are active, 100% active, right? It requires someone to really look for them, to really focus on them, to really push them, and to be interested in them. Right? I've been interviewed where I've started to tell a story and they've cut me off and moved on, and I'm like, I think you just missed the most important, the most valuable piece, right? Or I've listened
your 2 minutes.
But that's true. That's true. They may know me and go, this tell a story in less than 25 minutes. Therefore, we're just going to skip past it. But I've seen them do it to other speakers many times before, right? And I think it is incumbent upon whoever the enabler is to really seek out stories, right? Again, we live in stories. Our minds wake up and sparkle when we hear the sounds of a story.
I do think there's value, especially when you're discerning the difference between, a rumor and a trend, is the ability to do live disagreements. So what a roundtable gives you, especially a physical roundtable, less so a virtual roundtable, because it's very one after the other. Right? In a physical setting, you can actually disagree with your peer, right? To say, one of the famous disagreements I heard in the last 3 times were the difference between agnostic and native, but less interesting was the difference between work from the office as having positive impacts. So I've heard some CIOs saying, work from office was never good. I don't know why we ever forced it. Yay, 100% virtual. when another half of that room was saying, no, there was absolutely positives of working in the office. And here are some great examples. You can't possibly tell me that being in person at a whiteboard doesn't have some advantages as compared to the virtual version of that.
I mean, we've spent 400,000 years developing as a society, developing as human beings. We are absolutely unequivocally built for in-person communication.
Right.
There is no two ways about it, right? You're never going to build the social side of your job better than you can in person.
Right.
Yeah. The social side of your job is not 100% of your job.
True.
So even if you move, and again, we said this 2 years ago, right? Even if you move 100% virtual, I still recommend pay to put your people in the same physical room 4 times a year, twice a year. If you can only do it once a year, do it once a year, right? Build teams, not pay individuals. Build teams. Building teams has to be done to some large percentage in person.
Right.
Do a team building, get everybody together once a week. Do team building for a week, right? Do in-person whiteboarding. Encourage the people who live in the same cities to get together.
Right.
It's likely that you have some. You're going to have some outliers, some people that are 7 hours away from everybody else.
Right.
You have to be a little more active. But if you've got 2 people in LA, encourage those 2 people to get together, right?
Yeah. Grab a coffee, grab a meal, whatever you need to do.
Right. Especially if they're cross-team, right? If they're near field, it's even more valuable to get them together. Right. Someone from network and someone from DevOps, if you can put those 2 people in the same room, you're going to shortcut all kinds of miscommunication simply by having that back channel communication. That
I think we lost your audio.
There is no solution for that, right? There's no better way to do that. So yeah, I mean, but again, right, kind of to my comment on your prior comment, I'm not a human being that lives in black and whites. I live in nuance.
Right.
I live in grayscale.
And the disagreements create the nuance, I find. Right. So when you're reading a blog or listening to a podcast, while you can disagree in your head, there's value in actually having an argument, not a mean argument, but an argument to say, this has not been my reflection on reality. Right. My team doesn't work that way. My organization's culture thinks differently. And because of that, I have a different perspective of the value between some of these technology trends.
Sure. But I also want to, I think it's really, really important that we acknowledge that there are true isms that are true. I don't care what your experience is. You know what I mean? Like the sky is blue unless it is covered in gray clouds. You know what I mean?
Right.
You need water to survive, food, shelter, comfort. You know what I mean? Like there's
right.
all of these things that are truisms. Gravity exists whether you like it or not.
Right.
And I'm sorry, but again, 400,000 years of human evolution have some requirements. So I do take a little bit of an issue with people who, well, in my experience, science is wrong, but it's not. I'm happy to have discourse, but we all have to come from a place of the discourse really being coming from a good place, that you're not poisoning the discourse because you don't want to hear it. Right. And I think that's something that frankly we're losing, right? We're losing the ability to think and discuss things critically without it being personal, right? The number of discourses I've had where they've been personal is so few as to be able to be counted on one hand, and 0% of them happen in the office.
Right.
So you can disagree with me all you want. It's fine because it's not personal. It's not a reflection on who I am as a person that you disagree with me. That's
actually one of the observations was exactly that. One of my observations watching the last few roundtables was that it is very rare for an individual CIO to blame themselves. Right? It's very rare when a CIO has asked me, I've only been able to move and migrate 20% of my workload to the cloud. What's stopping me from doing any other percentage? And my answer to them is, it's obviously you. Right? It's clearly your inability to perceive value in the cloud, because it can't possibly be 80% of your workloads aren't physically possible to move to the cloud or modernize to the cloud or consume a SaaS product. Like there are many different things to make that happen. And you can see them taken aback from that comment. They say, it can't possibly be me. It's everybody but me. But it comes out in an in-person roundtable. And you're not going to get that from reading a blog or listening to a podcast or interviewing with an analyst. You're going to get that when peers network amongst each other.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. And let's be honest, if you are running into an obstacle, doesn't matter what the obstacle is, it is you. Because you is the only one you can actually change.
Right.
I can't change anybody else, even if they work for me. Right. I can ask them to change. I cannot change them. The only one I can change is me. So why not start with yourself? I've only 20% of my workloads have made it to the cloud. What are the 5 things I can do personally to increase that percentage? Right. And you're right. So few people start there. They just basically go, I'm going to tell them that's not enough. Yeah, but that doesn't really help. It doesn't really solve anything. Right. What were the guardrails that you placed? Right. Like, take a look at that. What is the definition of ideal cloud workload that you established? How did you set priority? Oh, you didn't
simply measure success differently. If you only had one measure of success for cloud, which was saving money, then I could see, only 20% are going to meet that criteria. Maybe you measure agility, maybe you measure scale, maybe you measure other things that might actually increase the number of workloads that could actually move to the cloud.
Yeah. An ROI shouldn't be limited to just financial. Right. Again, the goal of cloud, reduce technical debt, increase agility. Everything else is a side effect. Right. So reducing cost is a terrible success measure. It's fine as a tertiary success measure, right? Yes, I want it to be cheaper, but my primary 2 goals need to be agility and reduction of technical debt. Because anything else, and you're fooling yourself. All you're doing is moving the crap from one hand to the other, right? And hoping that someone else is going to manage the debt better, and in which case you'll never get the agility, which is really what cloud is focused on.
And especially relevant if you have a very small team, right? If you only have a person doing this work, there's no amount of cloud savings that's going to reduce that person to be less than a person. Right? You still have to hire this person, right? So you're not going to get anything out of that. Sure, if you have 300 people, I might be able to find 30 people's worth of stuff, but one person is not going to happen. The last observation I'd make is that you get to witness a lot of consistency in thought process. So in other words, the same CIO who said there was never a good in-person, team-based experience is the exact same person who said it's cloud only, right? It's never cloud edition. It's the exact same person who said, I'm going to build a blockchain version of my next thing, right? It's very consistent. So you could have arguments between what I'll refer to as the old school command and control CIOs in that room versus the new school innovation CIOs in that room. But they're competing against different stories, right? If I only have 5 workloads and they're 100% in the cloud, I buy that works for you. But if I had 5,000 workloads, I'm a 150-year-old company, and nobody's going to give me $1 billion to convert any of those to the cloud. I honestly don't think you're talking the same language. You can't compare the two. One's not better than the other because you're not experiencing the same reality.
For sure. So I would like to make a really strong statement. Neither of those CIOs are good CIOs. Command and control CIO is not the CIO you want, right? An all digital CIO is not the CIO you want. And the reason I say this is simple. A good leader exists, lives, breathes, dies in nuance. A CIO should never attempt to remove nuance from a conversation, but should attempt to understand, simplify, and explain nuance.
Right.
That is just the job. Right. The second I've decided that it's black and white, I've already lost.
Right. Very rarely is it a flip of a coin, these decisions. It's
Yeah, I would
much
say
more likely to be a spectrum.
Yep. It's not a light switch decision. There's almost no decision that's a light switch decision.
Right.
Except, do I want coffee? Yes or no?
Right.
Right?
Yes.
Like, I can't even honestly say, do you have to pee is necessarily a light switch decision, because it could very frequently be not at the moment, but I do sense it coming on.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
At least in the next 60 minutes, it might occur.
right. Not now, but probably after this call. Right. So I really I want to encourage our listeners, right? Look for the nuance, because I promise you it's there. It's there in every single thing. And the nuance is where you're providing value. The nuance is where you exist. The nuance is the layer that is your business on top of what otherwise would be a black and white technology decision.
Mhm.
And if you don't see the nuance, you're missing something huge that's just going to cost you. It's going to cost you reputation. It's going to cost you money. It's going to cost you people. It's going to cost you trust. It's going to cost you something. Look for that nuance and understand that nuance.
Carlos?
Well, definitely taking the time to understand when you should listen and when you should take action. When will the gossip will transform into insight? But I think that the biggest piece that I took for today, and I hope that our audience also remember, you need to trust your team, because that insight that you receive, or that it was a gossip but now you want to implement it, or you want to do something new, if you don't trust your team, you will never move forward. You need to trust your team so you can go. My friends, make sure that you share, you subscribe, and we'll see you on our next episode.